Your soul, Elias replied, will be the true territory of transformation. Neither the water nor the pact itself will be the center of this journey. You will discover that true redemption lies not in immediate acceptance, but in the winding path of understanding. Miguel felt himself at a crossroads. Elias's proposal represented far more than a solution to the drought. It was an invitation to an inner journey, a challenge that beckoned him to question his deepest convictions. The decision hung in the air, charged with expectation. Each breath seemed to contain not only Miguel's destiny, but also that of the entire community, observing him in silence, awaiting the unfolding of that crucial moment. In Miguel's journey, his adaptation to Elias revealed itself as a complex and transformative process. Each day brought new challenges that tested his determination to remain true to the pact of disbelief. Water, once scarce, now flowed generously through the fields, bringing life where desolation had once reigned. Neighbors observed the phenomenon with a mixture of astonishment and contained hope. Miguel felt the weight of their gazes, aware that his decision affected the entire community. His posture remained skeptical, yet there was something different in his expression, a subtly modified brightness suggesting an ongoing inner transformation. The harvests began to sprout with impressive vigor. Where cracks and death had once ruled, now robust crops bloomed. Miguel worked the fields with renewed energy, his calloused hands caressing the earth as if discovering a new language of connection. Internally, the young man waged a silent battle. Each moment of success came accompanied by profound reflections on his choice. Elias watched discreetly, his enigmatic gaze always present like a silent guardian of the established pact. The community began to notice subtle changes in Miguel. His traditional emotional distance seemed to soften. Small gestures of generosity replaced old isolation. Mrs. Rosa, ever observant, noted how his once dark eyes gained a different luminosity. Nights in the village became moments of silent celebration. Families gathered to share meals made from the newly harvested food, and Miguel, once a distant observer, began to participate discreetly in these gatherings. His transformation was not dramatic, but progressive. It was like a seed slowly germinating, nearly imperceptible at first, but with the potential for irreversible change. Miguel's internal challenges revealed themselves to be more complex than any external agreement. Water continued to be the central symbol of this journey. More than a vital resource, it represented the possibility of renewal. Miguel understood this not with words, but with a comprehension that transcended rationality, a wisdom that grew in the silence of each dawn. His pact with Elias seemed to take on dimensions that transcended the initially agreed-upon terms. Maintaining his disbelief became increasingly challenging as life around him flourished with a force that defied his logical understanding of the world. Miguel's transformation was like an underground river, not always visible but constantly flowing, carrying with it the possibility of emerging unexpectedly, bringing with it all the strength of interior change. The drought had transformed the landscape into a desert of hopelessness. Miguel watched the barren fields, each cracked piece of land silently screaming for the miracle that seemed impossible. The tension in the community was palpable, an invisible weight consuming the last hopes of its inhabitants. At the critical moment when water was more precious than gold, Miguel found himself faced with a choice that transcended mere survival. Elias, the mysterious traveler, brought forth a proposal that challenged not only his reason, but his very existential essence. "The water will return," Elias said, his soft voice cutting through the oppressive silence. "But the price will be to stay away from any manifestation of faith." The words hung in the air, laden with a meaning that extended well beyond an immediate solution to the drought. Miguel felt the weight of the decision. Each drop of water represented life for the community, but accepting the proposal would mean binding his soul to a pact that would keep him forever distant from any transcendental hope. His eyes swept over the faces of his neighbors, men, women, and children, all waiting for a miracle. The community watched him in silence, a silence charged with expectation and mute supplication. Mrs. Rosa, the village elder, gazed at Miguel with eyes filled with the wisdom of past generations. Her look was a mix of understanding and veiled hope. Miguel's dilemma was profound. Accepting meant condemning himself to an existence of absolute skepticism, denying any possibility of divine connection. Refusing would condemn the community to a fate of misery and despair. In the heart of a serene village, nestled among majestic mountains, a crystal-clear river meandered, breathing life into the community. Simple houses sheltered beneath skies that shifted between the deep blue of summer and the welcoming gray of winter. It was here, in this scene of perfect divine harmony, that Miguel would find his transformative journey. Miguel carried in his dark eyes the mark of silent pain. A young man with black hair and a restless soul, his existence was a mosaic of unspoken sorrows. Between natural kindness and deep skepticism, he navigated a sea of internal conflicts, rejecting any manifestation of faith that might breach his emotional barriers. His solitude was voluntary, a shield constructed against the hopes that the world insisted on offering. The agricultural routine of Miguel pulsed with the secular rhythms of the community. Each dawn found him in the fields, tending to the land, with a dedication that contrasted with his spiritual absence. His calloused hands caressed the seeds with technical precision, but without the reverential connection that his neighbors cultivated. The village exuded traditional harmony where every gesture was almost a ritual. Men and women gathered in the early hours to share labor and hope, exchanging bread and stories. Miguel participated mechanically, always present but never truly integrated. His critical stance toward religious practices created an invisible barrier. When the villagers gathered to pray before the harvest, he remained distant, observing with a mixture of disdain and incomprehension. His isolation was not merely geographical, but deeply existential. Neighbors noticed his seclusion. Mrs. Rosa, an elderly woman with silver hair and compassionate eyes, occasionally attempted to reach out, offering words of comfort that Miguel invariably rejected with a polished and cutting smile. His skepticism was a shield, a protection against any manifestation of spiritual vulnerability. In the community, every harvest, every season, and every celebration carried a sacred dimension. Miguel observed this collective movement as a foreigner, recognizing the practical value of traditions but refusing to delve into their deeper meaning. His routine was a dance of contradictions. An indefatigable worker, generous in his actions, yet emotionally distant. He helped his neighbors without hesitation, but rejected any connection that transcended immediate pragmatism. The weight of his disbelief followed him like a shadow, creating an abyss between him and the community. Each gesture of collective faith made him recoil, reaffirming his world built on rational certainties and a silent pain that no one could cross. However, his spiritual isolation would become the fertile ground for the transformation that was to come, unbeknownst to him. The drought arrived like a whisper of despair, transforming the lush landscape into a shroud of desolation. The once fertile lands now stretched arid and cracked, revealing deep wounds in the local geography. The crystal-clear river, once a source of life and joy, dwindled to a trembling stream, almost forgotten among dried stones. Miguel watched the transformation with a mix of impotence and revolt. Each inch of land turning to desert seemed to confirm his old convictions about divine absence. How could there be a God that allowed such devastation? The fields that once promised abundance were now a silent testament to abandonment. The community reacted with a mix of hope and despair. Older women gathered in whispered prayers, their faces etched with worry. Men wandered the fields with lost gazes, touching the earth as if they could extract some secret of survival from it. Miguel watched them, his skepticism turning into an almost physical pain. The scarcity of water became the great challenge. Each drop was precious, every reservoir guarded like a treasure. Families rationed not just water, but also their hopes. Children who once played freely now carried buckets with slow, careful movements, as if transporting life itself. For Miguel, the drought represented more than a natural calamity. It was the definitive proof of his disbelief. How could a higher power allow such suffering? Each wilted plant, every gaunt animal, each weary face of the neighbors seemed to scream his conviction. There was no divine goodness, only an indifferent and cruel universe. Tension grew silently. Once joyful conversations turned into murmurs of concern. The older ones recalled other droughts, but none as intense as this. The community, so united in other times, began to feel the first signs of disintegration. Families argued, neighbors distrusted each other, and hope began to wither, along with the crops. Miguel felt increasingly isolated. His rejection of faith, once a personal choice, now seemed almost a sentence of solitude. While others sought comfort in prayer and collective hope, he remained an island of rationality in a sea of spiritual despair. The drought was not merely a climatic phenomenon. It was an existential challenge that provoked the deepest questions about survival, faith, and hope. And at the center of this turmoil stood Miguel, a man torn between the reason that protected him and the vulnerability he fought to deny. The arrival of Elias in the village was like a breath of mystery, breaking the monotony of despair that had settled with the drought. His steps were slow, yet filled with an almost supernatural confidence. Miguel watched from a distance, intrigued by the figure that seemed to emerge from the desert itself, indifferent to the collective suffering consuming everyone. Elias had eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets, a gaze that penetrated beyond the visible. His worn attire contrasted with an indefinable elegance, as if carrying stories from distant places. When he approached Miguel, it was with a calm that unsettled more than it soothed. "The thirst consumes your land," Elias said, breaking the tense silence. His voice was soft but laden with an authority that made Miguel shiver involuntarily. "I know of a way to solve your problem, but it requires a difficult choice." Miguel felt his skepticism challenged. Elias's proposal hung in the air like a dangerous temptation, a pact that demanded he maintain his disbelief in exchange for permanent water for the village. It was an offer that confronted all his principles, but also his deepest fears of watching his community wither. Elias's eyes sparkled with an almost supernatural intensity. They were not the eyes of an ordinary man, but of someone who knew the darkest secrets of fate. Each of his words was calculated, every gesture loaded with significance. Miguel felt like a butterfly caught in a web of impossible choices. "You can save your people," Elias said, "but the price is to stay away from any belief. Your doubt will be your protection, your strength." The words were like sharp knives cutting through Miguel's last defenses. The possibility of resolving the community's suffering confronted his inner rigidity. The proposal was both simple and complex. Abundant water, life resurrecting the barren fields, families saved from despair, all in exchange for keeping his rejection of any divine manifestation intact. Miguel felt the weight of this choice like a world on his shoulders. On the horizon, the desert seemed to watch. The silent mountains bore witness to the dialogue that could change the fate of all. Miguel gazed at Elias, sensing that this encounter was not a mere coincidence, but part of a greater design that his limited understanding could not grasp. The choice hung in the air, suspended like a drop of water about to fall on parched earth. Miguel knew that his decision would mark the beginning of a journey without return, a path that would lead him beyond all the certainties he had built up until that moment. At the exact moment when despair seemed to consume the village, Elias appeared as an enigmatic figure, his eyes carrying a glimmer that mixed mystery with promise. Dressed in simple clothes but bearing a presence that suggested deep knowledge, he approached Miguel with a calm that defied the ambient tension. The inhabitants discreetly observed the stranger, sensing that something singular was about to happen. Miguel, initially wary, found in Elias's eyes a silent invitation for a conversation that would surpass the ordinary limits. "The water you so desperately need can be assured," Elias said, his voice soft as a whisper, yet charged with an almost inexplicable authority. "However, there is a price, a pact that will require of you more than mere agreement." Miguel felt a shiver travel down his spine. His rational mind struggled against the temptation of the proposal, while his heart, secretly exhausted from battling despair, longed for any possibility of salvation. Elias continued, his eyes fixed on Miguel. "Your disbelief must remain absolute. Not a single moment of faith can break our agreement. Water will flow abundantly. The fields will be reborn in green, but your skepticism will be the fuel for this transformation." The proposal was complex and laden with symbolism. Miguel understood that this was not merely a pragmatic negotiation, but a profound challenge to his own essence. Accepting would mean remaining imprisoned in his disbelief, denying any possibility of spiritual transcendence. Miguel's thoughts swirled. The drought had consumed not only the land, but also his last reserves of hope. Each day without rain represented a slow death of the community that he, even from a distance, still secretly loved. "And if I accept," Miguel asked, his voice trembling, "what will happen to my soul?" Elias smiled, a smile containing ancestral wisdom and an enigma that transcended immediate comprehension. Each breath seemed to contain the fate of all. Elias remained still, his penetrating eyes challenging Miguel to cross the limits of his own convictions. The proposal was clear. water in exchange for permanent disbelief. But Miguel understood that the true confrontation lay not in the water, but in the internal battle of his soul. Minutes stretched out like hours. The drought seemed to breathe through every crack in the earth, each wilted plant a silent testament to collective suffering. Miguel felt the weight of responsibility. His decision would affect not just him, but the entire community that watched him closely. In that decisive moment, Miguel realized that his choice would be more than a pragmatic solution. It was a test of his humanity, a challenge inviting him to look beyond his certainties. The line between reason and faith, always so clear to him, began to dissolve. Transformation was about to occur, not just in the barren landscape, but in the most intimate and complex territory of being human. The capacity to believe, to hope, to transcend the limitations imposed by doubt itself. The epilogue of Miguel's story revealed itself as a moment of profound spiritual and communal transformation. After breaking away from the mysterious pact proposed by Elias, the young man discovered that true strength did not reside in supernatural agreements, but in genuine connection with faith and with others. His first steps towards reconciliation began discreetly. Miguel gathered the villagers and proposed a chain of prayer and solidarity. Each family would bring what it could, a handful of grains, a little water, a gesture of hope. His hands, once instruments of skepticism, now wove bonds of communion. The landscape, once arid and dry, began to experience a nearly magical transformation. The first drops of rain fell gently, as though they were tears of forgiveness. The cracked earth drank each drop with ancient thirst, while timid green shoots began to emerge. The fields that seemed condemned to sterility rebirthed with surprising vitality. Cornfields grew robust, beans blossomed in generous pods, and fruit trees adorned themselves with promises. The community observed this rebirth as a miracle achieved, not through external intervention but through the strength of unity and shared faith. Miguel, whose eyes once expressed only shadows of doubt, now shone with a different light. His transformation was not just individual but collective. Neighbors who once saw him as a stranger now recognized him as a leader, someone capable of turning pain into hope. Mrs. Rosa, the elder of the community, watched Miguel with a smile of wisdom. Her eyes, filled with understanding, seemed to convey that true faith does not arise from immediate acceptance, but from the journey of questioning and overcoming. The village was no longer the same. Each house, every face, each plantation bore the mark of this transformation. Water, once scarce, now flowed abundantly not only in rivers but within hearts. The drought had been more than a climatic challenge. It had been a test of spiritual resilience. At the center of this new reality, Miguel understood that his redemption lay not in denying or affirming the existence of the divine, but in recognizing the transformative power that resides in every act of love, in every gesture of solidarity. His journey from disbelief had led him to the most unexpected place, the center of communal faith. The sun set over the renewed village, painting the sky with shades of hope. And Miguel, the young man who once denied any divine connection, smiled, not a smile of victory, but of deep understanding. Faith, he had discovered, was not an abstract concept, but a living force that pulses within every heart, willing to open itself. Miguel's journey reveals the true power of faith, not as submission, but as inner transformation. His story proves that hope can germinate even in the most barren grounds of existence. By breaking with the pact of disbelief, he illustrates that true strength lies not in denial, but in the capacity to reconnect, to believe in the possibility of rebirth, and in the divine generosity that surpasses our limited understanding.